Welcome to the 2020 Presidential Race Review. I'm your host, Jessica Kwong. The election has happened. We now have a president-elect, Joe Biden, and I wanted to invite back some of the guests I had previously on this show to unpack the results. I have historian and Columbia University lecturer David Eisenbach. He's a Democrat and also Republican speechwriter Lisa Schiffren. Welcome back, both of you.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Great to see you. I wanted to start off by asking if you think Joe Biden actually won the election. I know that we have a Democrat here and Republican, so there may be some opposing views.
You know, I thought the election was going to be very close, and it is close. It looked to me very clearly as if there was fraud in a bunch of places. There's no way to know until those votes are examined, which I think they will be, who really won. And, you know, the odds that there was fraud, I think, is very high. The odds that it's quite enough to flip the election, not so high.
So Lisa, have you accepted the results, or do you think that Donald Trump could still be the victor in this election?
I think that's possible and not probable.
David, what do you think about this? You're the Democrat here, so I'm assuming you think that it's all done. And
Yeah. Biden won by about 5% in the popular vote, and I think he's going to pull out Arizona and Georgia to kind of put him over about 306 electoral college votes, which is kind of the equivalent of what Donald Trump won last time.
Right.
Okay.
If that's the conclusion, then that's the conclusion. But if there was fraud, then we all want to know, I'm sure.
Absolutely. If that, we have to make the process go out. We've gone this long, and so recounts have to happen. Any allegations and investigations of fraud have to happen. We have to all be secure in the knowledge that this was a free and fair election.
I am shocked, actually, that having lived through, as I know all of you did, the 2000 election, where we sat and waited for 38 days for an actual legal, judicial, but also political decision. I'm a little shocked that the media gets to make the calls right now.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing television coverage for one of the Canadian networks. So we were operating off of the AP feed, and how they kind of were posting these numbers that, you know, basically made the red mirage happen. It looked like Donald Trump was winning. I think they need to kind of get a handle on that, at least present a more nuanced way of presenting numbers next time. Because when you had that red mirage, that really did kind of feed a lot of suspicions, which we're still dealing with.
Right. I remember on election night, we saw Donald Trump win Ohio. We saw him win Florida. We saw him win Texas. I didn't go to sleep really until 4 a.m. But did you think that at that point he was going to win? I thought that, wow, he looks like he's going to capture this election again.
I did, and that was the conversation we were having on Canadian television pretty much all night long. It was really kind of disheartening for us, for me. You know, and by the time I went to bed like around 4 o'clock in the morning, and then woke up and it was a whole other world. You know,
right.
You wake up thinking, oh my God, we got 4 more years of Trump. And then you turn on the news and it's, whoa, wait a minute. This is like an alternative universe. And I do think that somehow we got to get a better handle on the process in terms of how it gets reported on election night.
I agree, and I was reporting on election night as well, and you see different outlets, AP, Fox News, start calling states, and there just have to be a better process. And I think also the losers in this, I think, are pollsters, because all this time we were thinking that Joe Biden was way ahead, and I was wondering if you think that all this, the talk that we had of Biden ahead, did that affect how many people went out to vote? Maybe did it affect people's perceptions, whether they should head to the polls or not, or you think either way it didn't matter? I just think that for 2 elections now, the polls have been way off. So share your thoughts on that.
You know, I think something that sounds like a conspiracy theory, although it may just be that there's a conspiracy and discussing it sounds crazy. You know, I think the pollsters were dead wrong in 2016, probably innocently. But this time, I think this was a little bit like a psychological operation. It was, I saw the internal White House polling most of the summer, and it was very close. And there were moments where it was close one way and moments where it was close the other way. And I saw the polling at a couple of places like the Heritage Foundation. And there was never the huge gap. There are huge gaps in certain states that there always will be, but certainly not in the swing states. So I thought it was malicious, and I thought the intention was to create a sense of certainty that Trump could not win, so that when he won, it would be easy to contest that, if he won. It was never clear to me he was going to win, but if he won, and there had been a 20-point gap for 6 months, it's very easy to say, well, no, he must have cheated, or that's just not legitimate. I think when you look at who does the polling, there are a handful of independents, and they always come closest to reality. And then everybody else kind of works for the media. And the media, our major corporate media at this point, is no longer an objective bystander. They are part of the process, and they are participating, and I don't think that's cool.
Yeah. Well, I kind of, Lisa, clearly, except for Fox News, the media was pretty much for Biden and was not ashamed of being that way, in a way that you wouldn't have seen in previous decades. The media really slanted Biden. And in terms of the poll numbers, there are two possibilities. One is that Donald Trump even floated this idea that was part of a conspiracy meant to inhibit Trump voters because it would just dispirit them. The other is that the pollsters and the media are out of touch with the typical American. And that's the one I kind of favor, is they don't have a clue how real Americans, working Americans, west of the Hudson River think. They don't know how they process political opinions and positions, and they're out of touch. And I think that the polls really reflected that.
I agree with you 1,000%. One of my favorite reporters is a woman named Selena Zito, who came out of the New York Daily News, used to write for I think the New York Post, now is at the Washington Examiner. In 2016, she's kind of ethnic from Pennsylvania, and she had just lost her job as a reporter, and she was kind of driving around the backcountry in Pennsylvania, and she would see hundreds of Trump signs and no Hillary signs. And she talked to people in diners. It's like the old-fashioned kind of Hollywood version of reporting. And what she reported at the time was just that, no, you're not getting an accurate picture. And then she'd go to a rally, and the major media figures from big, fabulous outlets like the Post and the Times and CBS and NBC, they always go talk to the weirdos. And there are weirdos of predictable sorts at Democrat rallies and Republican rallies. You can always find the nutcases. And that's what they would do. And they did that for whatever reason, but partly because, as David says, they have no idea who Americans are. And there's kind of no interface between reality and these little screens we live with now. It just makes it worse. So I don't know how you would even meet people who are regular people if you're a New York Times reporter sitting in New York.
I totally agree with that. We have a perception in the blue areas like New York, DC, Los Angeles that Biden was going to win, but I don't think that there was enough looking at these smaller towns, middle of America. I think it was totally off, and I personally thought that it was going to be close, and it didn't surprise me that it was close. And like I said, when I saw Trump take Ohio, Texas, and Florida, I thought he was going to win. And but then again, I'm also not surprised, because I personally think that the coronavirus is what did him over. I think that he was going to win pretty easily if this pandemic hadn't happened, but the way he handled it, especially after he caught the coronavirus and saying that it was a blessing from God, I don't think that really left a good taste in people's mouth. What are your thoughts?
Well, if you look at the poll numbers, as the COVID cases increased in June, let's say, Trump's numbers went down. As they sort of decreased at the end of the summer, Donald Trump's numbers went up, and then with the fall surge, they went down, and Trump's poll numbers went down. So there does seem to be a correlation between numbers of cases and COVID cases. On the other hand, the counties now with the highest rates of COVID overwhelmingly voted for Trump. All right, these are mainly rural counties in the Great Plains and the Upper West, like Montana. So I still think we're going to have to kind of process the numbers to get a handle on what was the major driving issue. But I think COVID is probably it.
You know, I don't. In the summer, we had information in New York State that very red counties upstate were leaning way more away from Trump than you would ever expect because there's an older population and they were angry at Trump. And this became a thing that all Republicans across the country saw, that old people were going to not vote Republican the way they always do. And it turned out to be fake. It just turned out to not be remotely true in terms of, you know, what we've seen in terms of turnout and, you know, who voted for what. I certainly think people are very upset about COVID. Who wouldn't be? But I think lots of people also look at the response, and I think there's, you know, the reality is that you get it, it's a case, it's not a death. And it's a pandemic. Donald Trump didn't create this. I think lots of people understood that he didn't create it. And we have no choice as a nation but to deal with it. And I think half the country is happy to use it as a political issue, and the other half was happy to say, let's get through this.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa and David, for sharing those thoughts. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with more 2020 presidential race review.
There's a way to stop the spread of coronavirus. There's a way to protect others. There's a way to keep your family safe. New York figured it out. The answer weighs less than an ounce. It's not a heavy lift. Be New York tough. Mask up, America.
New York is the canary in the coal mine. What happens to New York is going to wind up happening in your city and in your community. We are going to fight every way we can to save every life that we can. We are all first responders. Your actions can either save or endanger a life. Job one has to be save lives. That has to be the priority.
Welcome back to the 2020 Presidential Race Review. I still have two guests with me, Republican speechwriter Lisa Schiffren and David Eisenbach. He's a historian and Columbia University lecturer and also a Democrat. Thank you so much for joining me for this unpacking of the 2020 presidential race. What an election, it was so close. David, I wanted to bring it back to something you mentioned when we had previous shows together. You said that the winner of this election is going to be determined by the stock market that day. So from my recollection, I believe the stock market was actually doing pretty well on election day, but Donald Trump seems like he's lost the election. I know it hasn't, the official numbers haven't come in, but he seems like to have lost. So any explanation on that?
I think it was COVID. I think that had the COVID not hit, Donald Trump would have probably had a kind of resounding victory. And that I think is the determining kind of factor. I think that as we look at the numbers, that's going to bear out.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that people don't trust Biden with the economy? Lisa, do you trust Biden with the economy?
Not by a long shot, but I think that's where the country is just split down the middle. I think we've seen this for the past many elections. Half the country seems to want a Democrat platform. And, we thought, I think in the primaries that they were leaning more moderate, but there's a socialist wing of the Democratic Party that seems to attract a fair amount of support. And that's real support. And the other half wants free market economics and less regulation and lower taxes. And, I think that you see that split. No, I don't trust the Democrats with the economy or foreign policy or a bunch of things, but be that as it may.
Okay. Well, in 2016, we had this huge debate about the Electoral College. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. And this time around, Obama actually had, I think, the highest number of votes in history. And then Biden has surpassed that. I believe Obama had about 69 million. Now Biden has about 74 million and counting. I want to bring the discussion to the Electoral College. Is that the way we should be electing the president, or should we go with a popular vote?
Well, of course, we would have to have an amendment to the Constitution, meaning 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the states, and good luck getting bipartisan buy-in on getting the Electoral College, getting rid of it. One of the funny things that I found in watching this process kind of play itself out, and we have to wait for days and days for Clark County to get their returns in for Nevada, and we got to get Fulton County's returns, and is how impossible it is, this system, to rig. That you would have to get so many people coordinated in these counties spread out throughout the United States that for all of its flaws, the Electoral College system does make it really impossible, this crazy system to fix. And I think that is one good thing about it.
So I would say two things to that. One, I like the Electoral College because I am a conservative who lives in New York. And the last thing I want is for my neighbors to pick policy for the whole country forever. And really, population-wise, New York and California can basically sway, that's half the votes. So I think it's very important that, and you look at a map of county by county and you see a huge red country with a bunch of cities that are blue. And some of that is people voting with their feet and moving to places that are congenial and then voting from there. We have two different cultures, and the Electoral College, I think, makes it more likely that either could prevail depending, which would not be the case if it were a popular vote. Then California itself kind of determines the outcome. And the more illegals you bring in and let vote, you can win that way. You can do, you can load your vote any one of a million ways, unless there's some barrier to pure democracy, which is something the founders worked very hard to avoid. A. B, as for rigging the vote, I'm just gonna say, the vote, I don't know if you have heard about these computer programs called the Hammer and Scorecard. These are NSA generated programs that were built after after 9/11 for use throwing elections in third world countries to prevent whatever, that appear to have found their way into our voting machines. And before you laugh at this, it sounds insane. but I think, I think you'll be interested to read about it if you haven't heard about it yet. So if you, in fact, you have electronic voting machines, as opposed to the ones we all grew up with that were mechanical, that were impossible to tamper with, it is in fact very easy to program. I've worked at the polls and I've seen it. It is extremely easy to program computers from outside. And it appears that that may have happened.
These programs, Lisa, you say that they were meant to kind of fix foreign elections? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they were developed by the NSA and used by the CIA. And one theory, which I think is probably true, but it's just an allegation, is that John Brennan and James Clapper brought these over to start using this is absolutely illegal. The CIA is not allowed to operate in this country and certainly not allowed to do this. But it appears that these programs have been used in the past, in 2012 in Florida, in 2016 in the Democratic primaries. It is entirely possible that Bernie Sanders really did win them, as anybody watching thought was going to happen just based on enthusiasm. But it's entirely possible. When you hear about these counties in Michigan where 6,000 votes were flipped in a minute because of a glitch, it's the same glitch across the country, and it's not a glitch, it's a program. So I think it's well worth looking into seeing if this happened, because we are very close to an age where Big Brother and our tech lords can actually determine way more about how we perceive reality than was true when we were younger and you walked into a booth and just pulled a lever and something cranked, and at the end of the day there was a vote count in the back. And that's not how it works anymore now. And that's apart from what we've seen of poll workers filling in the little circles and seeding illegitimate ballots into piles of legitimate ballots. So,
yeah, it's so frustrating, because 20 years ago we had the butterfly and the fiasco down in Florida. Man, that was 20 years ago, and we haven't fixed, and we haven't made a secure voting
system. It made it worse.
That?
The Chads were a problem, but New York State never had that. We never had Chads. Most of the country didn't. And the Chads, but that was a small problem. And this is a huge
It's a small problem, but we still have the same problems. We still have problems tabulating the vote. It takes a very, very long time.
No.
If what you're saying is true, then I say conduct a full investigation, and anybody responsible for any voter fraud, particularly if they're at the CIA, they need to be punished.
You want to look into this because it's actually fascinating. But it turns out that there's always been fraud, right? But the fraud used to be people who were not eligible in this district, or people pretending to be somebody who had died, walk in and pull the lever. And that is very limited in magnitude. You can only do so much of that in any given precinct. Whereas this, you can just do whatever the hell you want. I mean, we are told, a 3% margin that got flipped. You could probably do more. You could do less. You could make it look one way here and one way there, if this is true.
If it's true.
Al Gore, when he lost, went on a crusade against mechanical voting machines. And instead, we got these electronic ones across the country. They're fantastically expensive. An astonishing number of them were provided by Dianne Feinstein's husband, who took this up as a business after the Republican Senate voted to demand that we all use electronics instead of mechanics. So, maybe it's an honest mistake. I'm sure it was an honest mistake up front, but there's nothing, it turns out it's much easier to commit fraud. The same way there was no identity theft before we used computers for banking and business. It's just it's a side effect of having all of your data online, that it can be tampered with. So
system mentioned, these systems you just mentioned, do you think that they were in play for this particular election, or are you just talking in general?
Oh, I think they were very clearly in play for this election based on what I've read. No, I could be wrong, and either we will see that in the next week or two, or we will not. And maybe we'll see that it was used here and there. I don't know.
Okay. And the fact that we had to wait 5 days for the election result this year, do you think there's a problem with that system, or that?
Yes, entirely. It's crazy. We didn't used to have to do that. We are now worse off. And I also think that the mail-in voting, which was in some places necessary because of COVID,
Right.
you know, that's part of the problem.
Mail-in voting, David, your thoughts on that? Do you
Yeah.
think that had a huge play?
Well, it doesn't make sense to me. Countries in Europe have online voting. The ability for us you can buy a yacht for $100,000 online, but you can't vote online. We can't figure out a way of doing secure voting online the way we've done secure banking online. It's crazy. But I do believe that neither party really has an interest in making voting as easy as possible. It's a complicated process because they want to be able to control who comes out to vote, and both parties are guilty of that.
Mm-hmm. The mail-in voting, I think, really, I anticipated it was going to take longer because of the mail-in voting, but I didn't know that it would take this long. And there were all these memes out there on the internet about Nevada and why was Nevada taking so long. I really hope that doesn't happen again in another election, because I think Americans should know as soon as possible.
And by the way, this isn't just a Nevada problem. Remember, how long did it take the Carolyn Maloney, Suraj Patel congressional primary race to finally be decided? Right? This is the Upper East Side. That race had problems counting the votes. So clearly, there's something antiquated about our election system, and
Well,
I think we need to get.
I agree 100%. Except I would say we should go back to the antiquated system, the pre-sophisticated system, because that was just so much more straightforward. And we never saw this. We had a result,
Same night
or the next morning for every election of our lives until 10 years ago.
Well, thank you both so much for joining me on this episode of the wrap-up of the 2020 presidential race. We're going to have another part coming up very soon. Stay tuned, and we'll talk to you again very soon.